Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate Will inviting me out here and appreciate them goosing the schedule of this programming to make it a little earlier, because I, too, have a football game to watch tonight. Like everyone else, my son, even though I live in the New York City area, is a Packers fan. This is because he's about 7 years old, and kids of that age, if they're not rooting for the local team, they'll often decide who they're going to root for based on uniforms and uniform colors. So he loves the color green, so he's an Oregon Ducks fan. He's an Oakland A's fan. And when he was choosing NFL teams, I did everything I could to make sure he didn't realize that the New York Jets were green. And I was like, you're not going to live a lifetime of dismal failure, with a certain washed-up quarterback who happens to be there now, failing again. There's this team called the Packers, and they're green. So he owns a cheese head, and I stacked up on some more paraphernalia at the airport that I'll bring home. It'd be like an early Christmas for him. So yeah, you can cheer for that. Like we're in Wisconsin, right? So he actually, you never know what's going to come out of the mouths of kids like that at that age. So he asked me a hell of a question not too long ago. I was driving around town, and he asked me just randomly, "Daddy, are you going to die one day?" It's like, all right, we're going there, all right. I can't really lie to him about this ineluctable fact of human reality. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to die one day. There's a pause and voice in the back, but who's going to drive us around town then? So it really feels good to be loved. So I'm going to do three things. One Rick didn't mention. He invited me because I was canceled in a ridiculous controversy, which meant a huge amount to me personally, and it's something that I always remember. So I want to just address that controversy a little bit, talk a little bit about the election, have a concluding thought, and I'll be done within 10 minutes, I promise. So not to as a formerly semi-prominent figure in our national life used to say, I don't want to be too burdened by what has been, but I want to dwell a little bit on this controversy that is the proximate cause for me being here tonight. I'm delighted to be here. So I was on Megyn Kelly the night of the second Trump assassination attempt. I can't believe we have to enumerate the assassination attempts, but we do. So it was the second one. And we got onto some other stuff, too, when we were talking about Springfield, Ohio, because there was the cats and dogs controversy. And I was referring to Haitian migrants, and I began to misspeak and mispronounce the word migrants, kind of caught myself in the middle, and it was kind of awkward. And some people purport to believe I said the N-word, right? I really said the M word, which is not a word, you might notice. But people who pretended to believe this, their theory of the case, this exposed my racism because I have apparently kind of racist Tourette syndrome, right? So I go around all day and just randomly I'll just say racial slurs like out of nowhere. And even though I spent like the last 30 years speaking in public and on TV in very contentious settings and all the rest, this condition has only expressed itself once when it happened to me mispronouncing the word migrants on a podcast, right? That was their theory. Most of them didn't believe it, and they just put it out there to be malicious. But this spread on Twitter or on X, kind of unbeknownst to me initially. So one lesson I learned through this whole episode, if you're sitting alone, minding your own business, and you think everything's fine, and a friend just out of the blue texts you, "You okay?" ? That's a pretty good sign you're about to be canceled. So I got this text. It was actually from Chip Roy, the great congressman, who's a friend of mine. I was, "I'm fine, thanks. Why do you ask?" And then he's, "Well, they're saying you said this." And no, okay, now I know what it is. But I got the spread on social media. I thought maybe it was just limited to social media, but it kind of jumped the walls of social media. I got canceled by another conservative think tank, and I got canceled by Indiana State University. Indiana State University said it would be too much of a security risk for me to come on campus. They wouldn't be able to afford the security it would take if I showed up on campus. Like, they'd have to mobilize the bomb squad, right, if I showed up in some hall at Indiana State. So this was it wasn't like my livelihood was going to be canceled. It wasn't like National Review was going to fire me. But when you're in the middle of these controversies, it is isolating, and you don't know what's going to happen next, and you're kind of impressed with the unfairness of it all. And I didn't know what other speaking gigs I would lose, or even, it got crazy. Will my syndicate drop me? What's going to happen next? So it means a lot when people reach out, again, Rick, in moments like that. And it just brought home to me, if I was experiencing this, and it was bad, and I wasn't going to be fired, what's it like for people who will be fired for this kind of thing? You say the wrong thing, you work at a bank, and you say the wrong thing in a Zoom call, or someone thinks you've said something. It'll end your livelihood. It'll end your reputation. It'll destroy you financially. I was talking about this experience with a baseball broadcaster who reached out to me randomly. Actually, he's an announcer for the White Sox. And he texted me saying, I'm a baseball announcer, I know what it's like to talk all the time and how something can go wrong and people can be unforgiving about it. And I looked him up, and he said, I'm sorry you're going through this. Then I looked him up and saw he was a broadcaster for the White Sox, and I wrote back, no, I'm sorry what you're going through, because it was not a great year for the White Sox. But I met with him and had coffee, and I was out in Chicago recently. And there's a Oakland A's, as it happens, announcer who went to Kansas City on a road trip where the Negro League Museum is. And at the beginning of the broadcast, he said, we went to the Negro League Museum, and it was amazing. It blew me away. It was so amazing. But he said Negro quickly. And he was misunderstood the same way I was misunderstood. Fired. And I asked this, my friend, I've been meaning to reach out to this guy who was fired. What is he doing now? Nothing. Destroyed over a misunderstanding. And this is why survey after survey, and we know it anecdotally, people are afraid in America. Afraid. And we're supposed to live in a liberal society where the rule of law exists. And the First Amendment is in a very robust shape thanks to the Supreme Court, but this culture of free speech has eroded. And we have these little fascistic-minded people who want to destroy people personally for fun and profit and for ideological points. And it's deeply wrong, and we need to resist it with every fiber of our being. Now, my little story had a happy ending. NPR, they ran a story in the midst of this controversy saying, conservative editor-in-chief appears to say a racial slur. Right? What does that mean? Appears. I either said it or I didn't, right? And they quoted what I said about Haitian migrants, and they put brackets around my misspeaking of the word migrants, and they put slur. Bracket slur, right? Which is saying I said it. So I didn't appear to say it if I said a slur in there. I actually said it. So then I was kind of upset about this, saw it late at night. And then in the morning, I wake up, I look at it again, and my wife looks it up. And the headline had been changed to conservative editor-in-chief says misstatement led to accusations that he said a racial slur. So that's true. I said that it did that because it did. That was true. And they changed what was in the brackets from slur to word, which is better, but also not true, because what I said was not a word. But anyway, the public editor, I didn't know there was such a thing at NPR, started to get in touch with me. I was like, I don't want to deal with NPR. I don't like NPR. I haven't listened to NPR in years. Ignored her, and she was persistent. And finally I got back to her, and she was like, we want to know how the story made you feel. I was like, come, please, whatever. But I told her how I felt about the story, and to her great credit, she ran an extensive, like 1,000-word piece on how the story violated NPR standards in all sorts of ways and never should have run. So NPR basically took it back. So I'm not going to say hell froze over, but it was like it was here in Milwaukee today. It was sunny and in the high 20s, right? This was a great thing, and most people have forgotten about it. But again, I'll never forget your kindness and principle, Rick, for reaching out to me. So with that, let me address a much more important thing briefly, which is the election, which I think was a major repudiation of the left and a recalibration of the center. So what do I mean by that? If you take the center to be kind of the midpoint of the two parties, right? The middle between the right and the left, you had a lot of people who thought they were centrists or moderates. There are people. RFK Jr. is in this category. Elon Musk is in this category. Glenn Greenwald, Bill Maher kind of in this category. But they thought they were here in the middle. And then the Democrats go way over here on a bunch of stuff. So the middle moves over here, and this person who stayed, who didn't move, is now right of center. And that was a huge phenomenon in this election, because the media will portray, Donald Trump took this right-wing position. He said that males should not compete against females in sports. That is not a right-wing position. That was a position that was universally held by everyone, 5 years ago. It was right here. It was the middle. It was consensus. But because they went way over there, they moved the center and made a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise thought, okay, I'm maybe conservative-ish, or I might be with Trump, think they're with Trump. And that was a hugely important phenomenon in this election. I don't know whether they're ever coming back here, but if they want to win elections, they have to come back here. And it was a repudiation of Kamala Harris, who is this a puppet and a stick figure and a mouthpiece, just all along. A total artifice. The idea that she was the candidate of joy, right? So I don't think she was having more fun than the guy who went and served fries at McDonald's, right? And, I had this, I'm not the best political prognosticator, but I basically had this election right. I thought Trump was going to win all year long. But the thing I was most right about is that no hard evidence would ever emerge that Kamala Harris worked at a McDonald's. And did it, right? When she dies, hopefully decades from now, the editors of Wikipedia will be like, where's the evidence? Where's the citation for this McDonald's thing that was supposed to be in her bio? And Trump, of course, he did this YMCA dance that became a national sensation, right? Because it was a little ridiculous. He was willing to make fun of himself. I mean, if I can do it, it basically should not meet the technical definition of a dance. This is not a dance, right? I can do it. But he did it out there every day, and it just showed how he was supposed to be, the extremist who's outside of the mainstream, and here he was showing he was part of pop culture himself, and she couldn't compete with that. And then she was obviously overly scripted. I mean, you could have gone back in time and asked her to deliver the Gettysburg Address, and she would have said, thanks everyone for joining us here at what's many people considered hollow ground. I was raised in a middle-class household where people really cared about their lawns, right? And then you have, in contrast, Donald Trump, who's really this. We'll look back at this era now as being dominated by Donald Trump the way Andrew Jackson dominated the 1830s. Now, National Review and myself, we've had a touch-and-go relationship with Donald Trump. Obviously, very opposed him very vociferously in the primaries in 2016. I kind of made it up with him a little bit early on there in 2017. And what happened was I was at a dinner and someone said, Republican senators have realized that if you want to get in touch with President Trump, what you do, you call the White House switchboard between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. He's sitting in the residence watching Fox News, not doing anything else, and he'll take your calls. I was like, all right, I can try that. So, I called one night, 202-456-1414. I was like, hi, it's Rich Lowry. I'm calling for President Trump. And the guy picked up the phone. I was like, hold, please. I was like, wait a minute. You just put me through to the President of the United States? And then a lady came on, and she's like, thanks for calling. He's really busy now, but he'll call you back. I was like, sure, whatever. And then sure enough, the next day, the unknown caller comes up my phone, and there's another lady, and she comes on and says, are you Rich Lowry? I was like, yeah. And she's like, did you call the President of the United States last night? And I almost want to say, yeah, but it's just a lark, I was just trying to see what would happen. And then I was like, yeah, and she's like, hold please. And he came on. He's extremely charming the way he can be in person. And I related the story to Lindsey Graham at the time, and he's like, yeah, Rich, Trump is the easiest person to reach in Washington. And Graham said that when he couldn't get Mike Pompeo to call him back, he'd call Trump to get Trump to call Pompeo to get Pompeo to call him. Right? So, and there's this whole thing in the campaign about how dark Trump was. And, obviously he can be insulting and harsh, but the other aspect of him, he's wildly optimistic in a lot of his rhetoric and what is in his beliefs. I mean, he can be deceptive without even trying because he's a natural exaggerator. I had a friend who knew an advanced guy who was working with Trump in 2016, and Trump had an event in Virginia, in Roanoke, Virginia, I believe, and Trump was in the green room. He couldn't see the crowd, and as well know he cares about crowd sizes. So he was asking this kid, how many people are out there? What's the crowd? And the kid's like, sir, I've never seen this many people in Southwest Virginia. They're packed to the rafters. Sir, there are 5,000 people out there. And Trump's like, 8,000 people? And then And then the kid hears him pick up his phone. Joe, you won't believe it. I'm down here in Roanoke. I got 10,000 people. I got 10,000 people out there. So, but given all that, he does have these amazing moments of self-awareness. I was with him like a year ago. He invited me out to his place in New Jersey, and it was during the Bud Light controversy. And I was explaining to him, I think Bud Light's really screwed because now you can go to any liquor store or convenience store, and there's just better beer, right? The same price, just better beer in the same freezer. And he's like, wait a minute, you can taste the difference between different beers? I was like, yeah. And I was like, wait a minute, why is he asking us? And I realized he doesn't drink. And he addressed this once in public. It's like, you think I'm this way now. Just imagine if I drank, right? But a great statesman, Winston Churchill, had a totally different, and more maybe Wisconsin attitude to this when he was an elder statesman. He'd already been prime minister twice, but he'd still come to Parliament and hang out. And for young parliamentarians, this is like an amazing opportunity to hang out with this great world historical statesman and get pearls of wisdom. And one of these younger guys said he was talking to Churchill once and asked him about drinking. And Churchill said, young man, the key to drinking is to drink a little bit too much all the time. That's maybe not work for everyone, but it worked for Churchill. And the other thing about Trump, obviously, is this incredible charisma that can't be replicated, that can't be learned. If you go back to 2016, he basically won those primary debates because he was always leading in the polls, so he was in the middle, and he was the tallest, orangest, most vibrant guy on the screen. And he had this amazing personal command where other politicians would begin to say something or cut into him, cut him off, and he'd just go, shh. And they'd stop talking, right? I can yell at my kids, right? Shut up! And it has no effect. You just, shh. And Ted Cruz will stop talking. Like, how do you do that? It's like it's a magical ability. And he created basically a movement on the fly. So the way political movements in America usually work, they bubble up from below. Anti-war movement, you get the protesters in the streets, right? They're their first sign. I always like Reagan's line about the 60s demonstrators, by the way. He said once that they say make love, not war, but it looks like they can't do either. But you get the protesters on the streets, and then you get fringe politicians saying, well, maybe we should listen to them, maybe they have a point. You get publications, guerrilla publications that grow up. Then you have mainstream politicians say, well, there's a constituency here, maybe we should take it seriously, have legislation expressing what they want. And then you get a movement, and then you get a presidential candidate, then you take over a party, and then you're really getting somewhere. That happened with Trump like instantly, just out of nowhere. Like he did it, and the movement's been built kind of after the fact, after he came to prominence and won the first time around. So that's an incredible thing. And then finally, he and others around him just had a theory of the case, which is that you can move to the center on a few economic things, entitlements and trade mostly, and then you can move further to the right or be fiercer about some cultural things, and you're going to unlock a working class vote and actually broaden your coalition. It's going to become a more diverse coalition because we talk a lot in political analysis about working class whites, but white people are not the only working class people in America, obviously. There are a lot of Hispanics and blacks and others, and you saw this kind of happening between 16 and 20, but it really happened this year, and it's one of the most encouraging things about the current state of the Republican Party. It is becoming a more truly multiracial party because of this trend. And then I'll just leave with one last thought, maybe a higher order thought. Just as conservatives and patriots, we really should be infused with a profound sense of gratitude for all that we have. All we've been bequeathed by Western civilization. Like none of us, what do we do to deserve the achievements of a Beethoven or a Rembrandt or a Twain or a Dickens, or in the context of this country or Anglo-American history? What do we do to deserve parliamentary supremacy, which is the premise of our system as well, or deserve the Declaration of the Constitution? I mean, none of us were at Philadelphia in 1787. None of us were at Normandy in 1944. None of us were at Selma in 1963. So all this accumulation of thought and effort and sweat and sacrifice and blood has been bequeathed down to us, of this great achievement. And it enriches our lives immensely every single day in ways we don't even recognize. So as conservatives, our project is to recognize that and to be, because of that recognition, to be more committed to preserving it from external enemies and from internal enemies that perhaps are more threatening. Abraham Lincoln, before anyone had heard of him, and he was a young, talented lawyer, gave something called the Lyceum Address, where he talked about this phenomenon. He said even in the early, mid-19th century, we were invulnerable to military assault. So you could take the biggest army in the world, give it to the best general in world history, Napoleon, and that army could not take a step on the Blue Ridge Mountains or a drink from the Mississippi River by force of arms. Then he went on famously to say, if destruction be our lot, we ourselves must be its author and finisher. And as a nation of free men, we either must live through all time or die by suicide. And friends, I submit to you, we must resolve to live. Thank you very much.
So, I think it was interesting what you said at the end. I know Yuval Levin has pointed out that gratitude is a more accessible virtue for conservatives, because if your focus is on preserving your heritage, you will naturally be emphasizing gratitude, as opposed to people who believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with the society and need to be transformed. Gratitude then becomes less accessible to you. So I was wondering, you described the changes in the conservative movement. What is it that you think that the current Republican Party, as the political manifestation of conservatism, what are they trying to preserve? And what's important now?
Is this, I don't think this is working.
He turned it off, I think.
The switch?
Yeah.
Maybe you can make this work. I'm not handy at all. If my wife saw that, she'd say, yeah, typical.
It's like watching lawyers try to work audiovisual equipment.
When something breaks in my house, it's embarrassing. The kids don't say, oh, Daddy will fix it. They say, oh, Granddad will fix it. He lives across the street, and he does come fix it. So I think the current reflex in the Republican Party is basically the traditional one. We're going to defend the righteousness and the history and the constitutional order, the system of our country. It may have sort of different expression than it has in the past. But the beauty of our civilization is there is the potential for self-criticism. That's really important, right? If you don't have that, you're screwed. And this goes right back to the Greeks. But there's also a tendency of it to run out of control. And that's what we see now, with people believing that our country is rotten at its core, right? That was founded in when slaves came here, it was the real founding of America, and it was founded on the basis of that hideous institution, which is just a total lie, a disgusting lie. But it's permeated our educational system, and these protests we saw a year ago, so the pro-Hamas protests were a symbol. Some of those kids are foreign students, but some of them are just they've imbibed what they've been taught. They've been turned against their own country, and traditionally in history, you lie about the other people, right? There's an us-them dynamic, and you lie about them, right? The French lie about the Germans, or the Germans lie about the French. I think we're the first society ever in history to lie about ourselves, and it's a really disturbing phenomenon, because countries and societies become what they tell themselves they are, right? So Churchill and others thought the British were going to resist the Nazis after some initial reverses, because that's what the British always did. That's what everyone was taught about what the British did and how they operate and what's going to happen. So damn it, they went out and did it. So if you tell yourself that you're not a good country, all you've done is despoil the rest of the planet, all you've done is oppress victims, you're not going to have the civilizational or societal self-confidence to defend yourself in the world. And that's what's on the verge of happening to us, and it's very important to push back, and I think the Republican Party wants to push back.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like a first world vice, right? You only turn in on yourself when you no longer have to worry about any external threats, right? You have no enemies, so you become your own enemy.
Yeah, Douglas Murray, who writes for us and others, is very powerful on this with regard to Israel, where the Israelis, some Israelis kind of had the same worries about their young people that maybe we do about ours. Are they really up for this? Are they up for this fight? But after October 7th, they were. But Israel really has no choice to be lazy, right, and soft-minded. It can be lazy and soft-minded and be destroyed, or it can be tough-minded and serious and survive. And that's what we've seen. October 7th was a debacle, it was an intelligence failure, terrible all around. But what they've done over the last 3 months is the most extraordinary counterterrorism operations we have ever seen. Only Israel would be able to manufacture these beepers in such a way that they get a message, and you got to hit 2 buttons to receive the sensitive message, and that's when it explodes. So they're self-distributed by Hezbollah, and there's a guarantee the Hezbollah operative picks it up. And they made a profit through the dummy company that produced these things. That is a brilliant and serious society.
There was a great moment at a Bradley event a couple years ago. Dick Cheney was there, and he was telling stories about his time as vice president. And at one point, he was talking about an Iranian nuclear facility, and he said, "We couldn't take it out, but we just told the Israelis." And then he paused, and this big smile came on his face. And he says, "The Israelis are fantastic. They took it out."
By the way, just speaking of the Middle East, so Trump's truth socials are a little hit and miss, his truths. But the one the other day, that the American hostages are coming home, or there will be hell to pay. That's a fundamental American voice. That's the way an American president should react when American hostages are being held by a hideous terrorist group, and that there's been almost zero attention to the fact that there were American victims on October 7th, and there have been American hostages being held in the most terrible circumstances all along. It's a national disgrace. And, Hamas and Iran have a choice now. They can take a chance, maybe he's bluffing, or they can find out. And I kind of think they're not going to want to find out, but if they will, I have a feeling they're not going to like it very much.
Yeah. So, this gets back to some of your remarks about, why we're here. I think this one doesn't work. Yeah, no, you turn it. It was working? Yeah. Okay, let's try it again. Is this working? Yeah. Okay, it's working. All right. The light doesn't.
You see, he was about to blame me for that one not working.
No. I told you. I told you the most pathetic thing in the world is to watch trial lawyers try to work audiovisual equipment in court. We can't do it. If we were good at that type of thing, we could have gotten through calculus and gone to medical school. So it gets back to your remarks about why we were here in the first place, and that is, we do live in fear, right? The worst thing that you can be called is a racist or a blank phobe, and a lot of people aren't in the position to do something about it, which in my view has always made it imperative for those of us who are in a position to do something, who aren't going to lose our jobs, that we have to stand up and say no to this type of thing. And I think you've done that at National Review. We've tried to do that at Will. Others have too. Are we past peak woke, do you think?
Yeah, I think we are. I think peak woke was right after the killing of George Floyd, and it was the left has this just ability. It kind of can make you like a conspiracy theorist, because it seems as though there are 15 people, progressive opinion makers or whatever, meet in a room, and they come up with 5 crazy ideas, and then they just spread it throughout all of society. It's instantly adopted. And after George Floyd, with the woke stuff, with the adulation and the money thrown at Black Lives Matter, with the DEI, it just instantly took over almost every institution in American life. Museums, universities, corporate America, everything. And I think we're off of that. We're falling back from that. Corporate America, one, realizes the DEI is a waste of time. 2, they realize they might be sued. You guys have done great work on this. And colleges and universities are beginning to realize the same thing. And there's never any evidence that it worked. that the way they did, it made people more tolerant and all of that. It was either a waste of time, or now we have more compelling evidence. It's destructive, right? Which makes sense. If you sit people down and say you're an oppressor because of your race, gender, or status, and you're a victim because of your race, gender, and status, and you might not be aware of this, but it suffuses everything you do, that's going to make people more trusting, right? That's going to make people want to get along. So there's a big Rutgers study that they just did on this, showing that what did they do? So they had they had people read a passage about U.S. corn production, and then they had students read a passage drawn from Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo, the worst of these people, and then they gave both groups of students like a random scenario. And the scenario was just a student applied to an elite Northeastern college and got rejected. That's all it said. It's like one sentence. And then they asked a series of questions. Was the application officer, admissions officer biased? Is the applicant a minority? Is the applicant's life ruined? Should the admissions officer be punished? And the people who read the corn production passage are like, no, of course not. We didn't know any of that. The people who read Kendi and DiAngelo are like, yeah, the admissions officer has to apologize publicly. That's what they all thought. So this is just poison, and it's dreck, and we've, again, done it to ourselves. I do think it's receding. That doesn't mean it's still not dangerous and much more prevalent than it should be, and the work of Will and others in this area is extremely important.
Yeah. So talking again about, where we are as a movement and where the Republican Party is, the Republican Party, I think, is increasingly a working class party. Do you think that a working class party can be the party of limited government? And if so, what would that look like?
Yeah, so there's definitely a tension there. And obviously one of the reasons that Trump was more of a working class candidate than other Republicans, I don't want to exaggerate, by the way, the sorting that's gone on by education level between the two parties, it had been happening before Trump. Trump just kind of accelerated it and symbolized it, and it had been happening in other advanced democracies as well. So it's not just a Trump thing, but again, Trump exemplifies it. He wouldn't have been such a working class candidate if he didn't say, I'm not going to touch your entitlements because I realize you may need them when you get older. It may not be the means of being able to deal with cuts, and I'm going to protect you from free trade. So these I'm generally think we need to reform entitlements, and I'm generally free trade with some exceptions. So that does traverse limited government principles, and I'm not sure when that's coming back at the national level. But if you kind of come out a little bit more, all the excitement about Doge, and what Elon and Vivek might be doing there, that just goes to a very limited government reflex that's still prevalent in the party. If they say we're going to cut $2 trillion out of the federal government, which wastes a bunch of money and has a bunch of people doing nothing useful or maybe destructive things, most Republicans nod at that, right, for good reasons. So that shows the impulse is still there. And then also at the state level, you've had a Glenn Youngkin or a Ron DeSantis or Brian Kemp who aren't, they may not have been working class candidates kind of at the Trump level, but their coalitions reflect the change in the party coalitions, and they're still more traditional limited government type Republicans. So it's complicated, but I don't think Republicans, that they've become the big government party.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the questions I have is, how is that tension going to play itself out, right? There are people who I think are more what you call MAGA Republicans, whatever that might mean, more people that are sort of more traditionalist, maybe you'd call them Reaganite. Don't want to get hung up on labels, but is there going to be room for open conflict between these wings of the party when in those areas where they do disagree? Or will Trump, who is a lame duck, right, the minute he takes office, will there be the typical lame duck effect where, the president who cannot be reelected begins to lose authority, other people start to jockey, because they want to be the successor? Or will we have this a continuation of this dynamic where Trump just kind of rolls over everything in the way that you described?
The latter. I'm not sure Trump will be a lame duck when he leaves office the second term. I mean, he's such a legend in the party. He already had an incredible hold on it prior to winning the second time here. So, lame duckdom, you're right, it's he's going to be leaving and other people are rising up and we're no longer need to worry about this person too much. I don't think this is going to happen for 4 years, in this 4-year term. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, Democrats will probably take Congress in the second, in the midterms. That might make a difference. But his hold on the party is incredibly strong. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. See, now I'm sounding like Trump. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. I'm tired of all the winning.
Strongest control ever.
Yeah, but Trump is kind of a fusionist for our age. So this is an old National Review term. We're going to bring together the anti-communist and limited government types and the moral traditionalists. So Trump, he has Larry Kudlow, Art Laffer, Steve Moore, supply-siders who care about cutting government, cutting regulation, cutting taxes, and he has JD and Peter Navarro and a number of others who are more economic nationalists. And this has always been a tension within Trump's coalition and worldview. Was a little bit in 2016, but much more now. Because in 2016, he won sounding like a different kind of Republican. Then he was working with Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and the Congress, and then he had these supply-siders around him. And it was kind of traditional Republican economic policy. This time, there's going to be much more contention over where Trump falls on this stuff. But it could be that, who knows, you can't forecast what's going to happen in 4 years. But if JD is the nominee in 28, he's much more of a populist than Trump is. JD is an ideologically committed populist. Trump is kind of an instinctive populist who also is kind of a big business type Republican as well. So it could be that we look back at Trump as the more traditional Republican, even though he looks so different now from the perspective of 28 or 29. But that's obviously highly speculative.
So I wanted to ask you, we talked a little bit about this before the event, about something which I think is important to the people here in Wisconsin. It used to be our assumption that Republicans would do better in low turnout elections and Democrats would do better in higher turnout elections. I think that that's no longer the case, that higher turnout in the Trump era benefits Republicans. Trump has done a very good job in turning out voters who otherwise were not voting. But it's more difficult to turn those voters out in midterm elections and off-year elections. And of course, here in Wisconsin, we elect our judges. We elect our Supreme Court justices. I think there might be a candidate for Supreme Court justice in the room as we speak. And so I'm sure he'll be listening with all ears now. How do you take that energy that was generated in the presidential cycle and regenerate it in a midterm or off-year election? Because I can tell you that, the folks in Madison are going to want to crawl over glass to vote for something in April after having lost this election. How is it that conservatives can they generate that enthusiasm to get those folks out to vote for something far more prosaic like a Supreme Court justice?
Yes, it's a real issue, and I'm not sure I have an answer, but this is one of the things that was insane about Democrats saying that we are vote suppressors. If we're vote suppressors, making it harder for people in some fundamental way to vote, we're going to end up suppressing our own people, right? Because our people are no longer the naturally high propensity, high turnout voters. Plus, the whole vote suppression thing was a hideous lie. I mean, they say Wisconsin's a vote suppression state. They say Georgia, remember the Jim Crow 2.0, Jim Eagle, right? There is a turnout there's been higher since they passed that law, which is a good law. The head of the League of Women Voters in Georgia actually complained at some point, we can't send people out anymore to register voters because there's no one left to register. Everyone's registered in the state. And you would have thought, from the perspective of 10 years ago, well, that's like a bad thing, right? Just as a practical matter, because these marginal voters are going to be theirs. No, they're ours now. And I don't know how you substitute for just the magic potion that Trump has to gin people up and turn them out. I think it's really hard. It's a real issue that the party's going to have to focus on and just use every single lever and every single means to try to meet these voters where they are and get them out. Prior to the election, I was talking to a journalist about Trump and something he did, and I was like, I'm not sure that's going to help with fence sitters. And he's like, no, you don't understand, Rich. He doesn't need fence sitters. He needs couch sitters, right? He needs a single guy who's sitting on his couch, has a bong on the coffee table, right? Probably has an OnlyFans account. He's playing video games all day. He needs that guy to decide on election day, no, I'm not going to White Castle. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. And God bless them, they found a way, right? Through all the Lex Friedman podcasts and Joe Rogan and all that. But, your average candidate can't do that or doesn't have access to the shows even if he or she could do it. So this is part of the trade-off. There's no pure upside in politics, right? It's always there's always a yin and yang element. So this has made it possible for Republicans to unlock a broader, more diverse coalition and win presidential elections, which is possible, but it's going to make it harder in races like the ones you're describing here in Wisconsin.
Yeah. So the big thing that's going to happen next year is that it's going to be the last year of the 2017 tax bill, right? These tax cuts are going to expire. There's going to be tremendous pressure to do something about them because if something is not done, we are going to see the mother of all tax increases, and it ain't just going to be rich people. So how is this going to shake itself out? Are we going to see tax giveaways to favored constituencies? No taxes on tips, no taxes on retirees, no interest deduction on car loans, things like that. Are we going to see a return of the state and local deduction? Do you have any sense for what this is going to look like? Because it's going to be a battle like something we haven't seen for a long time.
Yes, I don't think that the tax cuts aren't going to expire. They'll re-up them. But it's going to be extremely messy because there will be these carve-outs. There will be some form of the deduction will come back, even though I think getting rid of it was good policy. And it'll be messy, but this is what you have a legislature for, and there'll be a lot of horse trading, and they'll get it done.
Yeah. Will we see a cutoff of aid to Ukraine?
I don't think so. But this is one where I really think, when Trump says, there are a couple of promises he made. Like when he says, I'm going to fix the border, he's going to fix the border instantly. On January 21st, no one's going to come, right? No one is going to come. This is what happened the first time around. This is part of the point, and one reason they talk in such fierce terms. Mass deportation, camps, it's so the message is sent to everyone, don't come, don't bother to come. And that'll be good for a couple months, and then if they get in again, start getting in again, then the message, everyone posts on Facebook or Instagram, I got in, and the whole, half the village comes. So they will have to reinstate Remain in Mexico and a number of these policies, which I think they will, and the tariff threat is going to play into that. But on Ukraine, he's not going to solve it in 24 hours the way he says. It wouldn't shock me if he shakes something loose in Ukraine, because I think Putin has to realize, Trump's going to be willing to deal, and if Putin is seen to be the inflexible one, at some point, Trump will just say, all right, screw you. I'm going to back Ukraine even more than we're backing them now. And it's very notable. There are like people around Trump, important people, like JD will say, we got to cut him off. Trump has never said that. He's never said that. And I don't think he really believes we should do that. It's expensive. I think an unsatisfactory settlement would be better than the continued war, but the continued war is better than letting Moscow clearly win.
Okay. So on a scale of 1 to 5, I told you that, I have a big dog. I have to walk him a long way. The editors are definitely on my podcast rotation, so I know what you're good at. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being very likely, 1 being no way, What's going to happen? Are the following going to be approved? Following Trump cabinet nominees. Peter Hegseth.
So one is very likely?
No, one is no way.
One is no way. Probably a...
Have I done it the wrong way?
No,
I think I have.
No, there's no right or wrong way. I'd say probably about a 2 or 2.5. I mean, there's a lot of sympathy, understandably, for, he could be sunk by stories that, besides the note from his mom, which also publishing that's not, not so great. I feel very sorry for her, based on anonymous sources. But the problem Pete has is if you take the most lurid stuff off the table, I don't, if you look at the facts of the sexual assault allegation, I think they are on Pete's side of the story. But if you take the lurid stuff out, he was drinking too much and he was carousing, which shouldn't, is not necessarily a deal killer. And for a lot of rank and file guys, one of the New Yorker stories said, he went to a strip club and wanted to dance with the strippers and had to be restrained. Most of the rank and file guys, that's a credit to Pete, not necessarily a debit. But the problem is you have that comportment that doesn't quite add up, that you usually have in this position, with Pete being, and I like him, I'm friendly with him, he's a very good guy, and there's a chance he could give a real jolt of energy to a place that's too inert, the Pentagon, but he's a little bit of a leap in the dark whether he'll actually be able to run it and achieve what Trump wants to do. So if you get those two things, like it's one thing if someone, when Dwight Eisenhower is going to be the Supreme Allied Commander and someone said, no, you can't do it because he once visited a topless bar in Abilene, Kansas. Everyone say, we don't care, right? We know we can do this, the most important thing. So there's a little question mark about whether Pete will be capable of it. So I think those two things will add up to probably sinking him, which, I feel sorry for Pete over that. But you could also get, if we got a Ron DeSantis as Secretary of Defense, that would be, in my mind, materially enhance the national security of the United States in really discernible ways. And this is a kind. There are not many of them available, but this is the. And I'm being like one of the panelists and the editors now. I'm talking way too long when you ask me a very simple question. But what you want, what Trump's sort of selected for with some of these is zeal, which is important. But with a DeSantis, you get the zeal, or ideological commitment is another way to put it, and knowing how Washington works because he was a congressman, and being intellectually serious because he reads everything and absorbs it and smarter than everyone else in the room, and experience having done it, run agencies. You get that package, then you do transform the FBI, you do transform the DOJ, you do transform the Pentagon. Again, there are not many of them available. I don't know whether Trump would tap them or DeSantis would take it, but that would be the upside of what would be kind of a sad story if Pete doesn't make it.
RFK Jr.
So 5 is he's likely.
5 is likely.
Confirmed.
Yeah.
Probably like a 4-ish, 3.5 or 4. It's going to be a messy confirmation hearing because he said even if you think he has a point on a lot of important things and that bureaucracy needs to be shaken up too, he said a lot of things that are really outlandish. It's going to be uncomfortable for him to walk away from those or explain those. So I think there's some, and the story is that he's kind of lording it around Mar-a-Lago like he owns the place at the moment, when he really should be so grateful for Trump to giving him HHS as a pro-choice Democrat, and an environmental extremist. So there's some chance the confirmation hearing goes so badly, some Republicans get uncomfortable, but I doubt it. I think he'll be the next Secretary of HHS.
Okay. I think we're going to move to questions from the audience. I have them in my hand. These are interesting. Here's one I think you'll enjoy. The question is, if William F. Buckley were alive today, what would he be tweeting about? Now, this assumes, and feel free to comment on, that he would be tweeting. But if he were, what would he be tweeting about?
He would be tweeting. There's no doubt about it. So Bill was an adopter of technology. He loved new things, and he used every form of media he could to get his message across and to fight with the other side. whether it was a print magazine or a TV show, obviously, or a syndicated newspaper column, or debates on campus, or what was like a very, 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 very early kind of proto-Twitter that was in the magazine, which I know it doesn't make sense, but they were only printed products then. But a feature called Notes and Asides, where people would write him, little notes, and then he'd do a one-sentence squib in reply that was cute or funny or memorable. So absolutely, he would be on Twitter, and he'd be engaging all the current controversies of the day.
Right. Liberals fear Trump will be a dictator. Is that a real fear? Well, I suspect that they do fear it, but is it a legitimate fear? Will he ignore the Constitution?
No, I don't think it's a legitimate fear. And it's very telling, during the elections, he's an existential threat to democracy. And so the midterm's going to be canceled? Like, what power would he have to end elections in America if he's this existential threat? And I was very struck by the top advisors to Kamala Harris went on this Democratic podcast, Pod Save America, to explain what happened in the election. And their basic take on the elections, we lost. There's some things we should have done better. It sucked. They use that word all the time, and we'll do better next time. But what does that mean? That there's going to be democratic elections again, right? So the idea is existential threat or he's going to be a dictator, I think, is wrong. Now, the problem with Trump is he can be impatient with rules or with the system as how it's traditionally worked or meant to be worked. I'd say the foremost example of this would be the push for recess appointments, which would, it's not a technical violation of the Constitution, or it's certainly a violation of the spirit of our system, and there's no reason to do it if you have good nominees that your Republican majority is going to support, and that's going to be true of 95% of them. But he sort of thinks, let's do them fast, let's get all of them. But there's a real role for advise and consent, right, of the Senate. But this isn't, crucially, this isn't an anti-democratic tendency on Trump's part. It's a overly democratic tendency. Like Elon has been on this too, and Elon's like, let the people decide, right? The people decided, which they did. They elected Trump. But then we have this constitutional system that has all these checks and balances and this cushions against any one person or party or faction having too much power, which is anti-democratic, right? Or at least a check on democracy. So I think that's what he has an impatience for, and occasionally you go too far on, and you need to try to push back on. But the idea that he's going to be a dictator was always a poisonous fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, we of course we have a case proceeding apace here against some of the Republican electors in Wisconsin, including a criminal case. And one of the things that always struck me is, well, I certainly don't approve of what happened after the election. The insurrection, as it's called, was essentially the assertion of a legal theory. It was a bad legal theory. It had, I think, little chance of succeeding, but could not have succeeded unless the Supreme Court were to say that it was indeed valid. And if the Supreme Court said that it was indeed valid, then how can it be an insurrection? Because now it becomes something which is lawful. So I guess we'll see how that plays itself out. Here's an interesting question. Would you consider the National Review as legacy media? And if so, how do you stay relevant with the impact of social media and podcasts, although, as we've noticed, you have quite a few of those?
So I do not consider it legacy media, because legacy media I consider another word for the mainstream media, the broadcast networks, the cable networks, the big major newspapers, all of which I think are fundamentally corrupt. Right. This is one of the more depressing things that we've lost on over time. I mean, conservatives have spent decades calling them out, creating institutions to call them out, to say how biased they are, and they've gotten more biased than ever. We saw it, again and again in the campaign. One of the prime examples of it was, the fact checking in the debates, right, which was so bad in the presidential debate that the Vance team actually got in writing from CBS, there'll be no fact checking. It was written down. It's like, contractual obligation, right? And they still fact-checked, or I should put steer quotes around it, fact-checked in the debate, because their fact checks are often wrong and misleading and counterfactual. So no, we are not. That's what we've always pushed back against and attacked and opposed. But we are a legacy in the sense that we've been around for a long time. We are fundamentally printed word people. Like if you wake up a National Youth staffer at 3 a.m. and say, the filibuster has been destroyed in the Senate. This person say, okay, I'll write an editorial on it right now, and I'll have it to you in 45 minutes, and it'll be brilliant. That's what we do really well and do naturally. It's our DNA. But obviously, that's not how most people are consuming their information now. So we've made inroads into doing new media, podcasts. Obviously, we have a social media presence, but that's going to be much more of our focus the next year or two. Is how do we take our message, take our content, which has a certain high quality, is never going to be a mass audience, but can reach more people than it does now by better exploiting video and podcasting and social media.
So as editor-in-chief, how do you deliberately curate diversity of thought and opinion? And is there a sense in which you feel that you need to allow healthy debate, but yet stay within institutional guidelines?
Yeah, so that's a great question. This is always a tension, but the history of National Review and most opinion magazines of our sort is you get as many smart people as you can. That's the first step, and they're creative and thoughtful and passionate, and you let them go. And they're broadly conservatives, but you might have a more libertarian conservative, you might have a more traditional conservative, and you let those tensions play out, because hearing different points of view and having them argue with one another helps establish the truth and sharpen your arguments. Now, there are limits. I mean, basically, we've over the years had maybe 1 or 2 pro-choice staffers, but they never write about it, right? For us, you're not writing pro-abortion pieces in National Review. You're not making a conservative case for why legalized abortion is a good thing. Now, you can make a conservative case. Oh, this pro-life legislation goes too far and is imprudent, is a tactical mistake. That's a good debate. So there's certain things that are just out of bounds for us, and we wouldn't do, but within guardrails, and they're always changing a little bit, and there's a dispute over what the guardrails should be. You want debate. It's a very healthy thing.
Okay. Let me ask you this, and this will be our last question, because I think it goes back to this tension between the more populist and more traditional wings of the movement. Is there any hope, revealing the biases of this questioner, is there any hope that Department of Labor nominee Chavez Raymer isn't confirmed?
Yeah, I think there's probably some hope. But I just think for Republican senators, if there's not like a personal scandal, they're going to be very inclined to go along with the Trump picks, and the ones that aren't going to make it are going to be like Gates, or maybe what happens with Pete. We'll see. There's no confirmation hearing. There's no vote. No one's standing up and saying, I'm the 4th senator opposing this Trump nominee, because that person's going to get nuked, right? So instead it's going to be vague unease, 6 to 8 senators. It's not going to happen. Why don't we just move on? There's a tap of the shoulder, and the nominee moves on. Could that happen with her? Maybe. I kind of doubt it. And the thing about the cabinet that Trump has assembled and the team that he's assembled, it's exactly what he campaigned on. Exactly what he campaigned on. Some of these folks I don't like. I'd want someone else. But RFK was there by his side, endorsed him actually at a critical moment of the campaign, campaigned with Tulsi, would go to not huge towns across America and draw 1,200 people on a Sunday night, and he was going to reward that. And that's kind of a normal thing that a president does. He rewards his coalition, and he had the head of the Teamsters speak at the convention, and he won. We'll see. We'll need better exit polls eventually, get better exit polls eventually, but a large share of the union vote, and this is their plum. And not my favorite nominee. I would vote against her if I were a Republican senator, but this is what he's campaigned on, and this is the team he's assembled. Now the question is, I think most of them get confirmed, and with some of them there'll be a big question of how effective they'll be, because that's going to matter a lot. But given the alternative, given the lies we were told over the last year about Joe Biden, and he could, I don't know, you've seen him in Africa. I mean, he barely, this poor president of one of these African countries, he's basically holding him by the hand. He's falling asleep in meetings. There's reports he's worse now than he ever was, and they told us, and they would have kept telling us this if it weren't for the first debate, that he was totally fit to serve another 4.5 years in office, right, to January 2029. It was a hideous lie. And then they told us all these things about Kamala Harris. And she would have been awful. She would have been terrible on uniformly everything. Some of my friends say, oh, she would have been better on Ukraine. I wouldn't have relied on her on anything. So it's a very good thing that Trump won. If nothing else, it's a repudiation of the left that's quite stinging and has put them on their back heels. And maybe they'll learn something from it. I kind of doubt it, but that's my take. But if I have just one last thought, two things. One, I want to thank everyone for being here, and secondly, say go Packers.
Thank you. I mean, that's the way she would have become president, right? I mean, Biden would have been reelected. He would have stuck around for a month or two, and then she would have become president with the possibility of running for reelection twice. So, scary thoughts. Scary thoughts. All right, Rich Lowry, your work here is done. Thank you very much. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.